Welcome to Off-Grid Path. This is a 12-part series on how we converted a rundown static caravan into our dream cabin here in the UK. I want to deep dive into how we went from this dilapidated static caravan into our cosy cabin home with no experience whatsoever. For those of you who are wanting to do something similar, I'll be taking you through all of the things that worked really well and also the countless mistakes and things that definitely didn't work throughout the whole process. If you want to check out this series and more videos like this, then just head over to my YouTube channel Off-Grid Path and subscribe for more updates. Welcome to part 2 of our 12-part series renovating a static caravan into our dream cabin. So with our heating for our cabin, it was going to be a log burner, and we were lucky to be gifted a log burner. It was a 10.5 kilowatt log burner, not in the best state, so we decided to give it a go and try and renovate it as best we could. Obviously, not knowing anything about log burners, we did our best to kind of take the burner and really just give it a good clean with a wire brush. We took all of the parts off it to begin with, like the kind of dampeners and everything like that, took it apart and just gave it a really good scrubbing with a wire brush. That was kind of the first start, getting this all the nasty stuff out of the inside. We were wearing masks, but they weren't like the kind of COVID masks. They weren't, probably could have done with wearing something a bit better. And then went about kind of cleaning all of the individual bits, taping those up, and then we got some stove paint. Now this comes in a can, and it's basically black stove paint. It's like a matte finish. It's obviously heat resistant, specifically designed for wood stoves. So really easy to use. You just need to prep the surface as much as possible. Obviously clean it, get all the crap off it. I guess you could sand it down. It's just getting anything that could kind of peel off that's come off, because you're essentially painting it from scratch. So that was literally a case of just taking each individual part. We taped up bits that we didn't want to spray, like the kind of thread of the screws and things like that, and then just sprayed evenly over all of the components and the stove itself, the main body of the stove. And then we kind of let that dry, and it looked really good. It was like, real quick change from a very sort of, used tatty burner to kind of almost looking, new again. So that was quite a nice project to do, to try and save a bit of money and also reuse some older bits of equipment like the burner. So having done that, we got that into the cabin, and we wanted to site it in that corner where we moved the doors from. That was where the burner was going to go. Now this is one of the things that people talk about is, why didn't you put the burner kind of more central in the cabin so the heat would sort of spread out? And that's a completely valid question and a really good point. And we did think about that, but we were limited in terms of where we could put the burner. This kind of central part of the cabin was going to be the kitchen. And we wanted the burner to be in the lounge, which is obviously one end of the cabin. The cabin isn't a huge space. I didn't mention this in part 1, but it's actually 40 foot long by about 10 foot wide, or 44 foot long by about 10 foot wide. So it's quite long, but not very wide, and it's not a huge space to heat. So we're going to site the burner in the lounge because we wanted a nice cozy lounge. I did think, with the kitchen being central, there's obviously nowhere we can put the burner. You might say, well, why didn't you put the kitchen down one end and then keep the doors where they are and then have the lounge in the middle? We didn't really want to be walking through the lounge, back and forth through the lounge. So we wanted the lounge down one end and the kitchen central. That was just our choice, really. So we knew where we were going to site the burner, and we just sort of put that in the corner and set that aside while we started kind of doing some more work on the cabin. So we were ripping up some of the floor. There was, floor over floor over floor, had kind of vinyl flooring, and then you've got like this kind of wood laminate flooring over the top. So we just pulled as much of that up as possible, and there's a constant cleaning process in the cabin, always kind of cleaning up. I really like a nice clean workspace, so at the end of every day, or sometimes throughout the day, it was very much like, let's clean up, sweep everything, and you're kind of starting fresh. Otherwise, like I said, you're working in a small space it's very easy to get on top of yourself with too much stuff. So I really like, cleaning as often as possible, just to kind of have a, there was a lot of thought process going on into this build, and a chaotic kind of workspace really doesn't do well with my head when I kind of needed all that mental energy focused on learning new things, as it very much was with the cabin. We decided to tear down the internal walls, and at this point we started to have a really good idea about what the internal layout was going to be, and it was essentially going to be the same as it was before. So this static caravan was actually a 2-bed static, and one of those bedrooms was literally just big enough for a bed, pretty much. They had 2 very small single beds in there, and then the other bedroom was like a double bed, again a small double bed. So the idea was to kind of keep the same layout, but I didn't want to keep the internal walls. They were a bit crappy, the insulation was really bad, they're just very flimsy. So we started tearing down those internal walls with the idea of building much more sturdy, bigger, chunkier internal stud walls, and what that was going to do was brace the entire cabin, again making it a lot stronger than it was before. Some of you might be saying, well, why take down the internal walls? And that was the reason, that you could walk past the wall and it would move. They're really flimsy, so it was a case of taking those down, start again. So at one stage we had the cabin completely gutted with no walls whatsoever, no internal walls, so you could see from one end down to the other, and then went about rebuilding those internal walls with the internal stud work. And as soon as that was done, the whole cabin was much stronger. They really added so much strength to it. So everything we were doing in this build process was adding so much strength to the cabin. Now it's worth bearing in mind at this point, this static caravan was never going to be moved. So when we first got it, it was in place, in situ, and we wouldn't have been able to move it anyway at that point. Like the chassis underneath was, although it was in good condition, the actual structure of it, you're not going to move the cabin. The wheels and everything were just rusted and not in the best state of repair to be able to move the cabin. So we knew from day one this cabin was never going to be moved, not even after building it. So we didn't have the issue of weight, of having to worry about how much weight we were adding. We obviously had the issue of worrying about, are we adding too much weight for the structure of it? So the idea was, when we added weight, we were strengthening it. We did do a good kind of visual inspection on the chassis, and it was in good condition, and it still is in good condition. It's been very dry under there, and it's not rusted. It's the only kind of thing that was a real issue was the wheels, the wheel arches, those components to actually move it that weren't in the best position. So we did reinforce that, but I'll show you that down the line. So again, reusing wood for the stud work, and you can see it's fairly solid wood that we're using, just to add the sort of structural integrity. So these were being drilled into the walls, into the floor, and also into the roof joints as well. So the flooring is an interesting one. The idea was to replace the entire floor, but actually what we found was the floor was actually pretty good. We pulled up a little bit of the floor, and the insulation, although it's not, it could do with being thicker and better insulation, but everything was, to our surprise, really dry and in good condition, not rotting or anything like that. So initially the idea, we thought we were going to have to pull the entire floor up and replace it, and even replace some of the floor joists. But we got underneath the static and had a really good look, and then again on top, had a good look, and the floor was actually in pretty good condition. We did end up replacing 2 bits of the floor behind me, and the reason for that is basically to reinforce the floor for where the log burner was going. Obviously the log burner is quite heavy in itself, and we had a hearth going down, which is obviously quite heavy as well. And so we wanted to reinforce that floor, so we put a couple of floor joists, just pulled the floor up and just added joists to it, just to make it structurally a bit stronger. One of the priorities is to get the burner installed, ready to go as quickly as possible. because this cabin has been kind of susceptible to damp, and this build was going into the winter. I think this was probably about October time, so we were working our way into the winter season, where we're going to get a lot of rain and a lot of damp. And so I wanted to get the burner done as quickly as possible, especially while the cabin was so open, because I wanted to get to the point where every time I was coming in, I was lighting that burner just to try and dry everything out as much as possible. And one of the fantastic things about wood stoves and log burners is that they suck the moisture out of everything. They make it such a dry environment, and to the point where some people actually have kind of humidifiers, I think they're called, where they've literally just got a kettle and water on top of the burner just to get moisture in the air. They're that efficient at sucking all of the moisture out. So that was priority number one. Focus on getting the burner in so that we could start drying the cabin out completely as we build while it's gutted. So one of the things that we did, because the burner was 10.5 kilowatts, that's how big the burner was, far too big for the space it's trying to heat. What we needed was 5 kilowatt maximum for the space that we needed to heat. And we ended up with a 10.5 kilowatt, which is twice as much as what we need, and can't complain because it was free. So the idea was to pad the inside out, and we're going to be using it's a brand called Vicas, and it's called Fireboard, basically. Not cheap stuff to buy, but what it does do, if you line the inside of your burner with that, it makes the burner less efficient, obviously, because you're making the internal space smaller. But it does lengthen it does give you a bit more longevity to the burner, because you're protecting that kind of outside wall of the burner, and you're effectively padding it with Fireboard. So you're increasing the longevity of it. But what you're also doing is reducing the efficiency of it, which sounds very negative, and I guess it is in some senses. But for us, we wanted to reduce the power output of the burner. Really easy to work with. I don't know what is in Fireboard, but it's probably extremely chemically. It's probably not nice stuff to work with, but in terms of inhaling it, but it was very easy to work with, very easy to cut, very easy to manage. And one thing I would say throughout this build is that we didn't use PPE as much, and that's kind of one big mistake that we had. And again, that's just being naive, just not experienced in this sort of thing, is that we really weren't good using PPE. That's kind of one big lesson that we learned was, if we're going to do this again, and hopefully we will in the future, is PPE will be very much a big thing, and we'll certainly invest in PPE. So once we kind of installed that Fireboard, we also just needed to reinstall some fireproof rope, which acts as the seal around the doors. Again, very easy to buy online. You just need to find the right kind of gauge, the right thickness of rope for your door, because they come in different thicknesses. And so you can see here we're using two different thicknesses, one for the kind of inside window bit where the windows will go on and it will act as the seal there, and then for the outside seal for the door. Very important to have fire rope. You need it for the seal around the door and the windows, depending on what burner you've got, but you certainly need it around the door. So again, really easy thing to install. The rope usually comes with a glue to glue on, and obviously that glue needs to be at least fireproof. So this comes to the end of part 2 of the 12-part series of our cabin renovation. And in the next part 3, we'll be talking about the log burner install from start to finish, and you'll see our first light in our cabin of the log burner, which is a super exciting moment for us. So thanks for watching, and if you've got any comments, please leave them below and I'll do my best to get back to you. Cheers.